Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop. We just finished our bandsaw series, and we were going to go to the lathe, but Jake suggested maybe we should do the table saw instead. Now, I kind of wish I had done this a couple of months ago because I actually had 3 table saws. I know we're low on them, but I have 2. And like we did with the bandsaw, what I want to do is show you some of the features that I really like, that I appreciate, and maybe that'll help you in your decision. It would be very difficult for me to suggest you buy anything other than a saw stop. I'm not supported by them. I don't get any freebies from them. Great service. But it is the best table saw, period. If you can't afford it, at least I'll show you some features you should look for. I want to start over here. This is a Wadkin. Now, this was an English brand, and I'm guessing this is probably a 1970s vintage. And just to tell you how I came by it real quick, I used to teach in Calgary. I used to rent a technical school out there. And I can't remember what year it was, but I showed up in July to get ready, and they were changing out all their table saws. Now, this school is huge. And they had unisaws. Anyway, I asked them what they were doing, and they said, well, they were replacing everything with general table saws. I said, what are you doing with the unisaws? Selling them. I said, well, I'll take one. He said, nope, you got to take them all. So I ended up with 24 table saws. Now, I thought they were all unisaws. We had those guys loaded on a train and shipped them back to New Brunswick. And when they arrived, we had 2 of these Wadkins. We had 2 big 12-inch Deltas, and then we had the rest unisaws, which we sold all of them. But I kept this one because it was a really good saw. And someone told me that this was a $5,000 or $6,000 saw if you were to buy it new. Anyway, I'm glad we did. When we renovated the shop, our main shop at the other location was still up and running, and we had to have a table saw there. So we brought this down and set it up, and worked great. We cut a lot of styrofoam with it. We cut a lot of everything with it. Now, I wasn't thrilled with the dust collecting, but I'll show you a little bit about that. And I'm just going to kind of go through this as I think of things that I like about it, and I'll share it with you. First thing I'm going to talk to you about is the fence. I thought they did a really good job on the fence. Now, I have not done much of anything in terms of restoring this, scraped some of the rust off, and just made it so that we could use it. But what I like about the fence is it's easy to move. So you can go from one end of the table to the other. And if you've watched any of my other videos on Around the Table Saw, I've always had a complaint that what I don't like about the Biesemeyer, which is on the saw stop, is there's no micro adjustment. So you're stuck having to just tap it with your hand to try to get it exactly where you want. So Delta on their unisaw had what was called the jet lock fence. And what was nice about it is when you got close, you could then engage a knob, just like this, which would engage, there's a bunch of teeth underneath this bar. And when you push that in, there's a sprocket in there that engages, and then you have that little micro adjust that just really helps when you're trying to dial something in perfectly. You'll also notice this thing. At one point, there was a measuring tape along here, and like I said, I've done nothing to restore it. And then there was a little magnifying glass here that had a red line down through it, so you could dial that in perfectly. When you do lock it, you just pull that lever up, and it's nice and solid. I also like this feature. You can loosen these knobs, and you can slide that forward or back if you need to, which I can't really understand why you would. But you can also take this out, and you can lay it on its sides, lay it down flat. Now, I put this auxiliary piece of MDF on there just to raise it up so we had a little higher fence. But the nice thing about laying it down there is you'd be able to, because the blade tilts into the fence, I'm sure there's some good reason why you do it, although I've never done it. Just a little more flexibility. Tighten that up. What else can I tell you about this? Now let's move over here. Oh, the miter gauge. My biggest beef with my saw stop, bigger than not having a micro adjust on the rip fence, is they have a really lousy miter gauge. It won't stay perfectly tight. This thing you'll see what I had to do. The bolt would come loose. That bolt that runs up in there would come loose, so I had to go in and drill 2 different holes in and put nails through it to pin it. But it's a $20 miter gauge on a $5,000 saw. That's the best way I can tell you. Their miter gauge is much better. It's pretty stout. Real simple pins, and you can lock it on three positions, 45, 45, and 90. Now, there's a little bit of slop in this if I'm running it over here, and I'm going to show you how to get rid of that. So what I have over here is an anvil, and I've got a punch, a pointed punch, and I'm going to go in here and just hit that. And what that does is it'll mushroom the metal and make it stick up a little bit. And we'll go back over. I don't want any side-to-side slop at all. No, just a little bit at the back. In case you don't understand that, when you drive that point down in there, the metal has to go somewhere and it comes up around it. And it just gives you a little raised bump. Just enough to take that slop out. Nothing. Now, if you had raised it up too high, you just take a file and just knock a little bit of it off. Somebody's already done this before. And just until it fits perfectly. Now, that's a quick tip for you. Now, what else can I tell you? Splitter's kind of weird based on what we are used to. I don't like a long throat plate like that that's completely disconnected out there at the end, but I guess I can't get around it with that thing sticking right up in the middle. In order to change the blade, and there must have been a wrench that was with it originally, but we didn't get it when we bought it. There's a hole in there that you just got to put a rod in. We got a big spike, and then get your other wrench on that nut to take the blade off. It does tilt. It does tilt toward the fence, unlike my saw stop. Now, in fairness to this machine, I have not gone through and cleaned this up and made these things work a little bit easier. And by the way, if you look over here, the wheel for both the angle adjustment and the height adjustment is it's not the best. I like the one on the saw stop. It's larger diameter, which gives you a lot more torque. Now, you'll also notice that we've got duct tape all over this. When we were in here working and we were cutting styrofoam, we insulated the ceiling and the walls with 2-inch rigid styrofoam. And that stuff blows all over the place, so we had to have some dust collection. And all you have is just a great big open cavity in here. And down here, you've got a, what is that, a 5-inch? I thought it was 4, but I think it's a 5-inch port. No, it's 4. And we had a cap on it with just, all we had for dust collection down here was just a central vac. Not a central vac, but a shop vac. So we had a little 2-inch, we had put in a block of plywood with a hole in it that would fit into. It wasn't the greatest. So we had to go in and we had to seal off all of these openings to try to get a little better suction so that light styrofoam wasn't blowing up in your face. There's, I think this uses there's 2 belts in there for power transmission, which just reduces the slippage. Anything else underneath? This is cast iron, obviously cast iron top. I should give you the dimensions on the top, which is pretty good, but I'm just going to compare real quick to the saw stop. So this is 28, the metal portion is 28 by 40, and the saw stop is 30 by 44. Not a ton bigger, but enough. Nice, rigid, heavy bar, so you're not going to have any problem with flexibility in that. Well, we've got this sitting on a cart just so that we can move it around a little bit easier. Think of anything else, Jake, on this machine? I'll cut a board with it and just let you see how it works. By the way, that's got a Freud rip blade in there, and we're gonna talk about saw blades too, because I'll show you my collection. I have tons of those, and I'll tell you why I like this one in particular. I'm just gonna straighten this edge real quick. Not particularly noisy. Switch is in a nice position, but that was, I think, mounted by somebody else. Good machine. If it wasn't for my saw stop, this would be my second choice. I think I actually like it better than the Unisaw. And that extension was added on after the fact as well. All right, now let's come over here. This really deserves to be taken apart. We did a video already on saw stop, and I may be repeating myself a little bit, but in fairness, I need to show you everything about this and try to convince you that this is a saw to buy. First of all, this is the Biesemeyer Fence. This is what I had on my last saw, and it's the best in terms of how simple it is. You see how long this bar? This is a big T-bar system, and it's extremely well made, rugged, welded, everything's welded together. So that sets down in there, and there are two friction pads here, and there's also two nylon adjustments right underneath here and underneath here. So when you put that down in place, and then you bar down or push down on this lever, the leverage is such that that pulls everything and rights it so that it's right on the money. Good and sturdy. Now, actually, I'll in our next episode, we'll talk more about setting up your fence because you want that to be done right. But I'll just point it out from a salesman perspective right now as to some of the features. This is just all rugged, good, heavy construction. You've got your magnifying thing here with the line down through the middle. And I'm surprised how many people still get into the habit of measuring from the fence to the blade, and they don't trust this. This can be as accurate as you can possibly read. Nice big table, as I mentioned. The extension is an option that was purchased with it. This is a weakness. You can never seem to keep that flush. It's always dropping down. How many times have we gone in there and tried to fix that? This is really light. This is all softwood construction with a piece of plastic laminate on top of it. Some point I'll go in there and I'll redo that because that was just not a very good. That's another minus. If you're thinking about how you evaluate this saw, that would not be a plus. If we look over in here, this is where you can see. It's another problem too. I've gone through several of these latches. They don't last very long. They're a little bit on the flimsy side. I'm just going to open this up and see if we can't get a little more light in there so the camera can see it. We've got magnets on here just so that the blades would be in a more convenient position. Okay, see if I can get this one open. I'm afraid if I try too hard, I'll break it. No, there. Okay, so on most saws, do I have that trunnion off that old? You don't know what to do with it? On most industrial grade saws, you have the power transmission from the motor to the blade is done through 3 V-belts. 2 on that other machine I just showed you, but 2 or 3. And that's to reduce slippage. The problem is that those V-belts are usually only about that big around, and it takes a fair bit of torque just to turn them. There's so much friction. So what these guys did is they used a serpentine belt, which has all kinds of grooves in there, but it's nice and flexible, yet at the same time you get all kinds of friction or contact area between all those little grooves in the pulley on both top and bottom, and it's a nice thin belt. It's easy to move. And then it goes from here over to here, which actually drives the motor, the shaft that has the blade on it. Now, here, I remember I was saying this is how much bigger. In fact, better just saying how much bigger. Let's actually measure it. So this one is an 8-inch diameter. And these are 5.5. That makes a fair bit of difference. There's the center, the knob in the middle is to lock it. But I've had another weakness with this is that this gets clogged up, or I'm not sure what happened, but we had to take this apart. But once we fixed it, it was great. Moved really easy. We need to do it again. Is that the one that will tilt, Jake? The gauge for determining your angle is nice and clear, easy to read. In fact, it's probably the easiest of any saw that I've used. And you can adjust that so you can get it bang on. I curse this, although it's a nice safety feature. If you end up with a measuring tape in your shop apron, especially on the left side, sooner or later you end up banging into it and it shuts off your blade in the middle of your cut. But it is a nice safety feature if you had to ever kill that really quick. You can just hit it with your knee. I think some of the other saws now have that built in, but these guys started with it. I want to show you the dust collection. And believe it or not, this is really important, particularly if you're spending any great amount of time in your shop. The last thing you want to be doing is having to breathe dust like MDF dust all day long. So here's what these guys did that made such a great system. If you look underneath here, actually come all the way to the back. So if you follow ours, the hose comes down underneath, and there's a 4-inch port on the back side. But instead of just emptying into a big cavity, what happens when that occurs is your velocity drops. Instead, they bring that shroud. If you look in there real quick, you can see the flexible hose goes right up, and the whole blade is sitting in a compartment. Now that door just moves so that you can change your blade and change your safety cartridge, but then you want to close it when you're using it. And then mine has an aftermarket edition, which was supplied by SawStop. It's right here. And what they did is they closed that area down even further, and they directed all of the suction to the bottom side, which, as the blade is spinning and taking sawdust with it, that's where it's being thrown. So material is going to get hit all through here, and then it's being sucked up. And it made a big difference. Rarely do you ever see any dust coming up this way as a result of that improvement. Now, I'm just going to lower this down and show you. If you can peek your head in here and look and see. When I bought my saw, it arrived. Jake and his brother Rex came down to the shop with me. They were only probably 15 years ago, so they weren't very old. We tried to unload this off the back of a trailer, thinking it was actually attached to the skid, but it wasn't. It was just sitting on it. And as we tipped the skid down off the end of the trailer, the whole saw came out, landed on the concrete floor, flipped over, and landed upside down on its top. I left it there for the night, didn't want to deal with it, went back the next morning, took it all apart to see what was destroyed. Well, the only damage done, there was a little bit of a burr right there on the edge where it had hit. But when we took the top off and you look underneath and you see the size of this trunnion, the trunnion is that whole apparatus that supports the motor and the blade. The thing is massive, and it's designed to absorb all the impact or all of that torque as a result of this blade being brought to an abrupt start if and when that cartridge is fired. And that's when you really appreciate these things are made to last forever. Another nice feature, how much time are we at? How many? 19? Oh, these might be a little bit longer. Let me finish off with a couple more features. And this is I've been doing this all of my life. I actually started on a Shopsmith. What a nightmare of a table saw that is. But you have to get things perfect. You cannot have your rip fence not being lined up with your saw. You can't have your miter gauge slots not lined up with your saw blade. So the top attaches to the base. The motor, the blade, everything that is attached to the base. So it's the top that then sits down on top of the base, and you have to align that top to the blade. So on everybody else's saw, there are 4 bolts, one in each corner. And what you would do to try to line it up is you'd loosen the 4 bolts, and then you get in there and you just start slowly moving and tapping, and it was a bit of a pain. In fact, it's a little more complicated than that, because what you would do is you would put your miter gauge in the slot, and you would bring the blade all the way up, and you would measure from the miter gauge to this tooth, and then you would bring that tooth around to that side, move your miter gauge forward, and make sure it got lined up. And it was a lot of work. Anyway, so here's what these guys did. Same thing, 4 bolts. But then there's a pin underneath here, and there are 2 set screws mounted horizontally back here. So once you loosen the 4 bolts, you just go in there and you move one thread one in as you're backing the other one off, and everything pivots from the front until you get it exactly where you want it. That system holds it tight as you reinforce it by tightening those 4 bolts. So precise. No reason why not to have this lined up perfectly. All right, we'll end there just so that we're not going on too much. Save some for tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to finish talking about the saw stop. I'm going to go in, I'm going to show you how to adjust your fence to get it perfect. I'll show you how to adjust your miter gauge. We'll talk a little bit about some of the sleds that we use. I'm a big fan of table saw sleds. And what else were we going to talk? Oh, we're going to talk about blades too, and I'll get out some blades and show you the different brands, show you what I really like. May even talk a little bit about attaching a router at the end of the table. I'll talk to you about this extra piece that we brought on to cut down on dust. And whatever else I think of between now and then. See you tomorrow.